The first time I saw another woman's name on the building I had spent 6 years creating, my baby's ultrasound was still inside my evening bag. 8 hours earlier, I had been alone in an examination room, staring at a grainy image on a monitor and trying not to love the tiny flicker in its center too quickly. "There," Dr. Shaw said, moving the cursor. "That's the heartbeat." The sound filled the room, fast, fragile, impossibly determined. My hand rose to my mouth. For a few seconds, I forgot how to breathe. 8 weeks. After 2 years of negative tests, careful hope, and one pregnancy that had ended before Grant and I had allowed ourselves to choose a name, there was a heartbeat inside me again. Dr. Shaw's expression softened, but she did not close the appointment with congratulations. "There is a small subchorionic hematoma," she said. "It's not uncommon, and many resolve on their own. But given your history, I want you to reduce stress, avoid strenuous activity, and come back next Tuesday. If you experience pain or bleeding, call immediately." I nodded as if stress were something I could simply remove from my calendar. "Does your husband know?" "Not yet." She studied me for a moment. "You don't have to wait until everything feels certain. Pregnancy rarely gives us certainty." I know, but knowledge had not protected me the first time. 2 years earlier, Grant and I had told our families at 6 weeks. He had bought a pair of tiny white socks and placed them beside our bed. 3 days later, I woke to blood. Afterward, those socks disappeared. Neither of us asked where he had put them. This time, I wanted one private evening before fear entered the room. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, and after the unveiling gala, I planned to take Grant home, sit beside him on the couch, and place the ultrasound image in his hands. On my way to the hospital, I bought a small ivory gift box and a card. In the back seat of the car, I wrote one sentence beneath the photograph. "Happy 5th anniversary. We finally made it." I tucked the box into my evening bag, beside my lipstick and the emergency medication I carried for patients, but had never needed for myself. That night was not only our anniversary. It was also the unveiling of Harborline Medical Center's new maternal emergency wing, the center I had spent 6 years building. By the time I arrived, the glass atrium glowed with white flowers, champagne towers, and the reflected lights of 3 television crews. Through the windows, I could see the new wing across the courtyard, its name concealed beneath a sweep of midnight blue fabric. Dr. Lena Ortiz, the head of maternal fetal medicine, reached me first. "You did it," she said, pulling me into a careful embrace. "Every rural obstetrician in the state owes you a drink. They can send coffee. I'm on call Monday." She laughed. "Still pretending tonight isn't about you?" It was not only Lena. Nurses stopped me to congratulate me. Representatives from county clinics asked when enrollment would open for the emergency transfer network. A reporter from a medical journal wanted to know how it felt to become the center's first executive director. I gave the answer I had prepared. "It feels like a responsibility, not a reward." That was true. 6 years earlier, a 19-year-old woman named Kayla Reed had arrived at Harborline after a 3-hour ambulance transfer from a mountain clinic. Her placenta had separated before the clinic could reach a specialist. By the time she reached our operating room, we saved her life, but not her uterus. Her baby lived for 11 minutes. The official review concluded that no single person had made a fatal error. The clinic had followed its limited protocol. The transport team had done what it could without a maternal fetal specialist. Harborline had prepared the operating room as quickly as possible. Everyone had done their job, and the system had still failed her. I designed the first version of the emergency protocol that winter. Over the next 6 years, I recruited obstetricians, trauma surgeons, neonatal specialists, flight crews, and rural nurses. I wrote grant proposals at 2 in the morning. I traveled to clinics where cell service disappeared 10 miles before the county line. I helped create an offline diagnostic module so a nurse could recognize hemorrhage, severe preeclampsia, or fetal distress without waiting for a video connection that might never load. I completed the clinical research. I defended the safety model. I persuaded 3 charitable foundations to provide the initial funding before Grant's Family Foundation contributed $1. The internal planning documents named me as the proposed executive director. The board vote had been described as a formality. Grant found me near the donor wall and kissed my cheek. He looked flawless in a black tuxedo, healthy and confident, with no visible sign that a donor heart beat beneath his ribs. 10 years earlier, viral myocarditis had destroyed his own heart in less than a month. Evan Vale's death in a cycling accident had given Grant the transplant that saved him. It was the fact around which much of our marriage had learned to orbit. "You look beautiful," Grant said. His gaze moved briefly to my evening bag, and my heart gave a nervous leap. I wondered if he could somehow see the secret inside it. "Happy anniversary," I said. "Happy anniversary." Lena says reporters are already calling me executive director. His hand settled lightly at my waist. "Don't get ahead of the announcement." I searched his face. "The board hasn't changed its mind, has it? They prepared something more meaningful." "What does that mean?" He smiled with the private confidence that had once made me feel safe. "Trust me, Mara. Don't spoil the surprise." I should have recognized the warning hidden inside the word meaningful. Grant used it whenever he wanted sacrifice to sound beautiful. But the atrium was full of people who knew what I had built. My research appeared in the evening's program. My team stood together near the stage. Grant had watched me work for 6 years. He had held me when Kayla's case still woke me at night. He knew what the center meant to me. For one more hour, I believed that knowledge would matter. At 8:15, guests crossed the courtyard for the unveiling. Grant stepped onto the platform beside the covered wall. The hospital board chair stood to his right. To his left was Dr. Iris Vale. I had known she would attend. I had not known she would be standing on stage. Iris had been Grant's first love. They had met in medical school and stayed together until the year Evan died. After the transplant, grief and obligation tangled their relationship into something neither of them could survive. Iris left for Boston. Grant met me 3 years later. She had returned 6 months ago after her divorce. Grant called her family. He called their weekly lunches an act of gratitude. Whenever I questioned how often her name appeared on his phone, he reminded me that her brother's heart kept him alive. Iris smiled at me from beneath the stage lights. She wore silver, the color of the ceremonial key resting inside a velvet box beside her. The board chair spoke first. He praised philanthropy, innovation, and the extraordinary clinical team that transformed a vision into reality. He mentioned my name between the foundation president and the construction firm. Then Grant approached the microphone. 10 years ago, I was given a second life through the generosity of Evan Vale and the courage of his family. Every day since then has been a gift I can never repay. Applause rose around me. I have often wondered how to honor a man whose heart allowed mine to keep beating. Tonight, we begin answering that question. He reached for the cord attached to the curtain. The midnight blue fabric fell. Gold letters shone against the stone. The Dr. Iris Vale Maternal Emergency Wing. For one suspended second, I thought I had misread them. Then the crowd applauded again. My fingers closed around my evening bag. Inside it, beneath my hand, was the small box containing the first image of Grant's child. Grant continued speaking. Dr. Iris Vale has devoted her career to women's health and healthcare administration. It is my privilege to announce that she will serve as the wing's founding executive director. The applause became louder. I heard Lena inhale beside me. Grant went on to explain that I would remain the clinical program director, leading protocol development and patient care implementation. He praised my tireless contribution and said Iris would provide the executive vision necessary to bring the project to an international stage. My contribution. My protocols. Her vision. The words were arranged carefully enough that anyone unfamiliar with the project would assume Iris had conceived it and I had helped make it practical. Grant lifted the gold key from its velvet case and handed it to her. Cameras flashed. Iris placed one hand over his. The gesture lasted only a second, but it was long enough for every photographer to capture the donor's sister and the man carrying her brother's heart. A photographer waved toward me. "Dr. Ellison, could you join them? Right in the middle, please." I did not move. Lena touched my arm. "You don't have to." But if I walked away, the story would become my reaction instead of what they had done. So I stepped onto the platform. Grant stood on one side of me. Iris stood on the other, holding the key to the center I had created. Closer together, the photographer called. A reporter raised her voice. Dr. Ellison, are you proud that your husband has honored the family that saved his life in such a significant way? The honest answer would have destroyed the evening. Instead, I said, tonight should remain focused on maternal safety. Iris turned and embraced me before anyone could ask another question. You built something extraordinary, she murmured. I promise I'll make sure the world sees it. Her tone was warm enough to sound gracious. But she had already placed herself between the world and my work. When we returned inside, the main screen began playing the project presentation. Iris took the stage and described the Rapid Response Network, the rural partnerships, and the offline emergency module. Her phrases were familiar because I had written them. She spoke about eliminating geography as a predictor of maternal survival. That sentence came from my grant application. She described a continuum of preparedness from the smallest clinic to the highest acuity operating room. That line came from a speech I had delivered the year before. The audience watched her as if the vision had arrived with her. Grant sat at the head table, smiling. I reached into my bag and touched the gift box. For one aching moment, I imagined walking to him, placing it in his hand, and watching the news of our child force everything else into perspective. Then Iris's face appeared on the screen above us, beside the words Founding Executive Director. I closed my bag. I found Grant backstage after the presentation. He was giving instructions to a public relations assistant when he saw me. Give us a minute, he said. The assistant left. I waited until the door closed. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted tonight to feel special. It did. He flinched at my tone. Mara, I know the title surprised you, but this is bigger than either of us. You gave Iris my center. No. I honored Evan's family. You put her name on the building. You gave her the position the board created for me. You made my entire team report to her. You're still in charge of the clinical work. Without executive authority, you don't need a title to prove what you've accomplished. Then why does Iris need mine? His jaw tightened. She has been through a difficult divorce. She left her hospital position in Boston. This gives her a meaningful way to rebuild. And you decided she should rebuild her career on 6 years of my work? She has administrative experience you don't. The board reviewed my qualifications. My foundation is funding a substantial part of this center. There it was not gratitude, not grief, but leverage. How long have you been planning this? Don't turn a generous act into an interrogation. It's our 5th anniversary, Grant. I know what day it is. You stood in front of the press and gave your first love my work, my position, and the building that was supposed to open tonight as the result of everything I sacrificed. What part of that was meant to celebrate our marriage? Nothing has happened between Iris and me. The answer came so quickly that I almost laughed. You think betrayal only counts if you sleep with her? His eyes hardened. I think you're allowing jealousy to distort something noble. Evan saved your life. Why am I always the one paying the debt? That is unfair. Is it? Every holiday she needs you at, every crisis she calls you for, every boundary I ask you to set, you tell me I owe her because you're alive. I owe her family everything. His heart gave you a future. It did not give her the right to take mine. Grant looked away first. This is symbolic, he said. You will still do the work that matters. That's exactly the problem. I left before he could explain why my humiliation was proof of his goodness. The next morning, I arrived at the new wing shortly after 7. My name had already been removed from the executive office. A facilities worker was fastening Dr. Iris Vale to the door while 2 assistants carried my files into a smaller room near the clinical station. Iris had scheduled a leadership meeting for 8. The agenda required all departmental reports to be submitted to her for approval before reaching the board. My electronic authorization for the capital budget had been disabled overnight. The rural partnership team had been instructed not to finalize new agreements without executive review. Then I opened the preliminary budget and saw that my offline emergency module had been placed under possible cost reductions. I stood staring at the screen until a voice behind me said, Mara, I'm sorry. Dr. Samuel Green, one of the hospital trustees, closed the door. The board was prepared to approve you, he said. The resolution had already been drafted. What changed? Grant withdrew the nomination from the agenda. A cold stillness spread through me. When? 3 weeks ago. The Mercer Foundation offered an additional $12 million on the condition that Iris be appointed executive director. 3 weeks. Grant had kissed me good morning, asked about my speech, and listened while I worried that the board vote might be delayed. He had known there would be no vote. This wasn't a surprise, I said. Not to him. After Samuel left, my phone rang. Tessa Morgan had led the software team that developed the prototype for my offline system. She had recently launched a small public benefit company focused on rural medical infrastructure. I saw what happened, she said. I'm going to skip the part where I insult your husband because we don't have all day. Despite everything, a broken laugh escaped me. I'm serious, Mara. Build the system with me. A real one. Designed for clinics with weak networks, limited staff, and no donor branding committee deciding whether safety is too expensive. 6 months earlier, I would have said yes before she finished. Instead, I looked through the glass wall at the team I had recruited. I can't leave yet. Because of the patients or because of Grant? Both. There was a pause. Tessa, he's my husband. I need to know whether there's anything left to save. Then find out, she said. But don't confuse giving him one last chance with giving him unlimited chances. At home that evening, Grant was in the kitchen answering messages about Iris's first press interview. The ivory gift box remained at the bottom of my bag. I have an appointment next Tuesday at 10, I said. He glanced at his phone. What kind of appointment? It concerns our family. I need you there. I held his gaze. I will not ask twice. Something in my voice finally reached him. He set down the phone and opened his calendar. Tuesday at 10, he said. I'll be there. He entered the appointment while I watched. That night, a news segment showed Grant and Iris standing beneath the gold lettering, their hands joined around the ceremonial key. The caption called them two people forever connected by the gift of one heart. Grant sat beside me on the couch, but did not ask why I turned off the television. Upstairs, I removed the ultrasound image from the gift box and held it beneath the bedside lamp. The baby was barely more than a pale curve in a field of gray. I did not need Grant to choose me forever. I needed to see whom he would choose once, when it truly mattered. For the next 6 days, Grant behaved as if keeping his promise to attend one appointment could repair everything he had broken. Iris behaved as if the center had always belonged to her. Her first leadership meeting began with a presentation titled Positioning Maternal Care for Sustainable Growth. My emergency protocols appeared on the third slide, compressed into a colorful diagram beneath her name. She proposed replacing most of Northstar's offline functions with a cloud-based platform developed by one of Harborline's corporate partners. The change would cut maintenance costs, centralize patient data, and create what she called a more attractive donor experience. The offline module is the reason rural clinics agreed to participate, I said. Some of them lose internet service every time there's a serious storm. We can provide satellite backups to selected sites, Iris replied. Selected according to what? Patient volume, financial sustainability, and measurable return. You mean the clinics serving the poorest communities will be excluded because they cannot generate enough revenue? Several people around the conference table looked down. Iris folded her hands. I mean this center has to prove its commercial value before we can subsidize every remote facility in the state. This is an emergency network, not a luxury service. And emergencies still cost money. I pulled up the system failure model my team had completed 18 months earlier. If the cloud connection disappears during a wildfire, flood, or blizzard, the local clinic loses access to transfer protocols, blood loss calculations, medication guidance, and transport routing. The offline layer is not an accessory. It is the safety net. Iris glanced toward Grant, who had joined the meeting as Harborline's chief executive and the Mercer Foundation's representative. Mara has understandable emotional attachment to the original design, she said. But resistance to change cannot be allowed to interfere with the center's future. The implication settled over the room with perfect clarity. I was not protecting patients. I was a disappointed woman obstructing the person who had taken my position. Grant leaned back in his chair. I think everyone needs to remain professional, he said. He was looking at me. Iris's proposal passed for financial review. Within days, the words cost reduction began appearing beside the parts of the system that rural nurses relied on most. Training sessions were shortened. The 24-hour clinical hotline was recast as a premium service. A donor lounge received funding for custom glass walls, while 2 county clinics were told their equipment grants required further evaluation. Every objection I raised became evidence that I was bitter. Every concession Iris offered became proof that she was gracious. Grant asked me to make the transition easier for everyone. I began remembering all the times he had asked me to make things easier for Iris. On our wedding night, he had left the hotel for 2 hours because the date fell within the week of Evan's death anniversary and Iris had called him crying. I had sat in my wedding dress, still pinned into my veil, telling myself compassion was one of the reasons I loved him. He remembered every Vale family memorial, every transplant anniversary, and every birthday Evan had never lived to celebrate. When Iris returned from Boston, Grant arranged a furnished apartment, a driver, and a legal team to handle her divorce. He called each favor temporary. He called my discomfort unkind. Yet after my miscarriage, he had not known that I attended months of follow-up appointments alone. He believed the physical recovery had ended when the bleeding stopped. I had never told him otherwise because he was preparing for the Mercer Foundation's annual transplant gala, and Iris's mother had asked him to give the keynote speech. I had spent years mistaking my silence for strength. On Tuesday morning, Grant came downstairs in a navy suit and placed his phone beside my untouched breakfast. "I moved the executive committee call," he said. "We can leave at 9:15. "Thank you." The words felt too formal for a husband, but gratitude was all I could safely offer. He reached for my hand. "Maybe after the appointment, we can have lunch and actually talk." I almost told him then. Instead, I looked at the time and said, "Let's get through this morning first." At 9:12, his phone rang. Iris's name appeared on the screen. He let it ring twice before answering. Her father had developed chest pain during breakfast and was being evaluated at St. Catherine's. Iris was alone. She did not know whether it was his heart. She could not reach her mother. Grant stood before the call ended. "I'll meet you at the clinic," he said, reaching for his keys. "St. Catherine's is 10 minutes from Dr. Shaw's office. You said we were leaving together. This could be serious. So could my appointment." He searched my face as though trying to determine whether I was finally going to explain. "What is it about, Mara?" "Our family. That is what I told you." "I know. I'll be there by 10. He kissed my forehead and left. At 9:52, he texted that Iris's father was still being examined. At 10:11, he asked me to wait 20 minutes. At 10:34, he wrote that the cardiologist was reviewing the results. Dr. Shaw's nurse called my name at 10:40. "My husband is coming," I said. The nurse gave me the sympathetic smile of someone who had heard those words many times. "We can give him a few more minutes." At 10:55, Grant called. "They think it was an arrhythmia," he said. "He's stable, but they're keeping him for observation." Relief moved through me, followed immediately by another feeling I did not want to name. Then come. There was a pause. "Iris is shaken. Her father is stable." "I know, but today is also the family's private memorial for Evan. They moved dinner here so they could stay close to her father. My appointment started almost an hour ago." I said, "I'm coming. Give me 20 more minutes." "You have already asked me for 20 minutes twice." "Mara, please. This is complicated." "No, Grant. It is 10 minutes away. I will call you back." He ended the call before I could answer. I went into the examination room alone. The baby still had a heartbeat. I watched it pulse on the screen while Dr. Shaw measured the dark crescent beside the gestational sac. "The hematoma has enlarged," she said. "Have you been resting?" "I've been trying." "That isn't the same thing." She explained the warning signs again. "No unnecessary travel. No long hours on my feet. No lifting." I needed immediate medical attention if the cramping intensified or if I began bleeding. "Is the baby going to be all right?" "I can't promise that," she said gently. "Right now, the heartbeat is strong. That is what we know." I dressed slowly. Before leaving, I called Grant. No answer. I called again while walking toward the elevator. No answer. By the time I reached the parking structure, the ache low in my abdomen had sharpened enough to stop me beside a concrete pillar. I called a third time. At St. Catherine's, Grant's phone was plugged into an outlet beside Iris. I learned that later. I learned that she watched my name light up the screen. She declined the first call, silenced the phone, and cleared enough notifications that Grant would not immediately see how often I had tried to reach him. At the time, all I knew was that my husband was not answering. Warmth spread between my legs. I looked down and saw blood. My hands began to shake so hard that I nearly dropped the phone. I called again, pressing it to my ear while I lowered myself against the pillar. The call went unanswered. Then a message arrived from Grant's number. Grant is handling a real family emergency. Please stop making this harder. I read it twice. The words real family emergency seemed to separate from the rest of the sentence. I stopped calling. I pressed the emergency number on Dr. Shaw's discharge instructions and told the nurse where I was. She kept me on the line while security located me. By the time they reached the parking level, I was sitting on the concrete with my coat beneath me and one hand wrapped protectively around a child I could not protect by touch. The nurse knelt beside me. Stay with me, Mara. The emergency department is ready. I remember the fluorescent lights passing overhead. I remember someone asking for my husband's phone number. No, I said. Is there someone else we can call? Tessa Morgan. At the registration desk, I changed my emergency contact. The diagnosis was a threatened pregnancy loss. The baby's heartbeat remained present, but the bleeding had worsened and no one could tell me whether the pregnancy would continue. I spent the afternoon under observation, counting the seconds between every cramp. Tessa arrived from Portland just after 7. She walked into the room carrying a phone charger, clean clothes, and enough controlled fury to frighten the resident who showed her where to sit. Do you want me to call him? She asked. No. Do you want me to go find him? No. What do you want? I looked at the monitor beside the bed. I want to get through tonight. She took my hand. Then that's what we'll do. Shortly before midnight, the bleeding slowed. I opened my phone and saw a photograph posted by a member of the Vale family. Grant stood beside Iris at a private dining table, one hand resting on the back of her chair. A framed photograph of Evan sat between two candles. The post had been uploaded at 10:18 that morning. That was the minute I made my first call. Grant came home the following afternoon. I had been discharged with strict instructions for bed rest, but I was dressed and sitting in the living room when he entered. You left the clinic, he said. I called 3 times. Yesterday. This morning. Iris's father was kept overnight. But he was never in danger. We didn't know that at first. You knew it before the memorial dinner. His expression changed. How did you know about dinner? There are photographs. He removed his coat slowly. Leaving in the middle of Evan's memorial would have been cruel. What happened to your phone? It was charging. Iris said you called once, but hung up. She answered me. What? She sent a message from your phone. I showed him the screenshot. He stared at the words for a long time. She should not have done that, he said. No. I'll talk to her. You always talk to her. Mara, if Iris and I need you at the same time, who is your family? He looked almost offended by the question. That isn't fair. Answer it. She thought her father was having a heart attack. He was stable when I asked you to come. It was Evan's memorial. It was my medical appointment. You refused to tell me what it was about. I told you it concerned our family and that I needed you there. You expected me to walk away from people who watched their son die so I could live. I expected my husband to keep one promise. I shouldn't have to prove I love you by abandoning them. The sentence left him with the force of a verdict. He did not understand that he had answered my question. To Grant, abandonment only existed when he imagined leaving Iris. Each time he left me, he called it duty, gratitude, emergency, grief, or compassion. There was always a noble word available to make my pain sound unreasonable. I touched the hospital identification band hidden beneath my sleeve. I could have told him about the baby. I could have described the blood on the parking garage floor and watched horror rearrange his face. But I did not want his first act as a father to be another performance forced by guilt. You're right, I said. You shouldn't have to prove anything. Relief crossed his face because he mistook surrender for forgiveness. 3 days later, while I remained on medical leave, I hired an attorney. Under her supervision, I served Grant with divorce papers, submitted my resignation from Harborline, and arranged a formal return of every hospital-owned device, account credential, access card, and internal document in my possession. 2 independent observers attended the transfer. Every laptop was imaged. Every file was logged. Every password was disabled before I left the room. I retained only my personal research journals, original handwritten notes predating Harborline's funded development period, published academic work, and copies of documents already in the public record. My attorney cataloged each item and created a verified digital archive. I was not going to give anyone the chance to confuse leaving with theft. Tessa drove me to Portland. I took 2 suitcases, a box of medical books, and the small ivory gift box I had once planned to place in Grant's hands. At the last moment, I set the box on the dining table. Grant found it after I was gone. He called 11 times. Then he sent a photograph of the ultrasound image beside my anniversary note. Mara, what is this? I forwarded the message to my attorney. When Dr. Shaw confirmed 2 weeks later that the pregnancy remained viable, my attorney formally notified Grant. The letter included medical confirmation, a proposed schedule for updates, and a preliminary framework for future shared parenting. It also stated that my pregnancy did not alter my decision to end the marriage. Grant could be our child's father. He could not use fatherhood as a way back into my life. My attorney attached the screenshot of the message sent from his phone. Grant confronted Iris. She admitted replying to me, but insisted she had been protecting her father and preserving a memorial that mattered to her family. Grant told her she had crossed a boundary. Then he allowed her to remain executive director. Another conversation. Another warning. Another consequence paid by someone other than Iris. 5 months later, I was nearly 30 weeks pregnant and standing in a converted warehouse outside Portland while 12 rural nurses tried to break the first working version of Northstar maternal response. The name belonged to the company Tessa and I had built together. She controlled transport coordination, hospital partnerships, and field operations. I controlled clinical protocols, maternal safety, and validation. Major decisions required both of us. Neither name appeared above the other on the incorporation documents. Our first office had second-hand desks, unreliable heating, and a roof that leaked beside the supply closet. 2 investors rejected us because rural maternal care did not offer a fast enough return. 3 hospitals refused to participate after Harborline's attorneys warned them that my prior employment created ownership uncertainty. 1 early test routed a simulated hemorrhage patient to a hospital whose blood bank had closed for the night. Another failed to preserve medication records when a tablet battery died during transfer. We documented every failure. Then we fixed it. Every version carried a verified timestamp. Every code change was recorded. Independent reviewers witnessed major tests. An external ethics board examined our data practices. Nurses, paramedics, mothers, midwives, and family caregivers sat beside our engineers and told us where the system assumed resources they did not have. The finished prototype could operate without internet access for 72 hours. It stored emergency protocols locally, calculated blood loss escalation, coordinated transport using the last available route data, and synchronized its records once a secure connection returned. It was not elegant enough for a donor gala. It worked. Grant offered to invest through the Mercer Foundation. I instructed my lawyer to decline. I will not rebuild my life with money from the man who helped dismantle it. He sent another proposal with no voting rights attached. I declined that one too. A week before the National Maternal Health Summit, Northstar completed its final independent safety review. Our first 3 partner hospitals were prepared to sign pilot agreements. Tessa bought sparkling cider and placed it in the office refrigerator beside a carton of expired yogurt neither of us would admit owning. Then Harborline announced its new emergency platform. I watched Iris's presentation from my desk. At first, I thought exhaustion was making me imagine the similarities. The dashboard used the same 4-quadrant emergency layout as Northstar. The transfer workflow followed the same order we had established during field testing. Even the color change for incomplete patient records matched our prototype. Then Iris demonstrated a function labeled Lantern Q. My breath stopped. Lantern Q had been a temporary internal term. Tessa invented it during a power outage test because the paper cards we used to represent patients were arranged beneath camping lanterns. The phrase had never appeared in my Harbor Line work. It had existed only inside Northstar's restricted test build. Yet Harbor Line's version was incomplete. Its cloud interface copied the visible workflow without the offline database beneath it. The blood loss escalation screen displayed alerts, but the verification logic that prevented duplicate medication entries was missing. They had copied what they could see without understanding the safety structure underneath. Before our attorneys could demand an explanation, Harbor Line accused us of theft. The complaint alleged that I had taken proprietary maternal response designs before resigning and recreated them through Northstar. Grant, acting as Harbor Line's CEO, authorized the legal department to seek an emergency restraining order. The judge had not yet reviewed our complete development archive. Until a full hearing could be held, Northstar was temporarily prohibited from distributing, activating, licensing, or commercially launching the platform. Our 3 pilot hospitals suspended their agreements within hours. Grant called me privately that evening. "I'm protecting Harbor Line," he said. "This is not about Iris. You signed a statement accusing me of stealing my own work. I authorized an investigation. If your documentation proves independent development, the court will resolve it." You saw her presentation. "I'm not a software expert. You know who created the original system. That doesn't settle legal ownership." "No," I said. "It only settles whether you know me." His breath caught. "Mara, I am not choosing Iris. That is what you always call it when choosing her costs me something." I ended the call. The storm warning reached us just after midnight. A Pacific front had intensified faster than forecast, closing mountain roads and grounding aircraft along much of the coast. Power failed across 2 counties. Cellular networks began dropping one after another. At 12:17 a.m., Tessa's emergency line rang. The call came through a weak satellite connection from a clinic on a small island off the Oregon coast. A 22-year-old woman was hemorrhaging after delivery. The ferry had been suspended. The clinic's internet connection was gone, and its blood supply was dangerously limited. A rescue helicopter could still reach the island. The pilot had less than 20 minutes to launch before the weather window closed. The clinic had purchased access to Harbor Line's emergency platform 3 weeks earlier. Its system had stopped working the moment the network failed. Northstar could run. But 6 hours earlier, a court order obtained under Grant's authority had forbidden us from turning it on. The emergency channel from the island clinic opened on the summit's main screen at 12:21 a.m. Static broke across the audio. Behind it, I heard an alarm sounding in short, regular bursts. "This is Dr. Naomi Chin at Tillamook Island Community Clinic," a woman said. "We have a 22-year-old patient with severe postpartum hemorrhage. Blood pressure is 78/46 and falling. Ferry service is suspended. We have intermittent satellite voice, but no internet." The summit's emergency operations room filled within minutes. Physicians, hospital representatives, aviation coordinators, and reporters crowded behind the glass observation wall. Iris stood at Harbor Line's control station while 3 engineers repeatedly attempted to reconnect its cloud platform. "Restart the authentication server," she ordered. "We've already tried twice," an engineer said. "Then try the regional backup. The clinic cannot reach it. Their connection is gone. That platform has disaster redundancy." "It has cloud redundancy," I said. "That is not the same as offline capability." Iris looked at me as though my presence were the problem. "This is not the time for your commentary." On the screen, Dr. Chin leaned closer to the satellite terminal. "Is Dr. Mara Ellison there?" The room went quiet. "I'm here," I said. "I attended your hemorrhage training 3 years ago. We need your offline protocol." Before I could answer, Northstar's attorney touched my arm. "The restraining order prohibits activation and distribution," she said quietly. Harborline could characterize any use of the platform as a deliberate violation. Grant had arrived beside Iris. His face was pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "Mara, wait," he said. "Let our legal department contact the court." "How long?" "We're requesting emergency clarification." Tessa checked the aviation feed. "The pilot has 15 minutes to launch. After that, the storm closes the route." I looked at the screen. Dr. Chen's patient was losing blood while lawyers searched for a judge who might be asleep. For years, I had waited for Grant to decide whether my work, my needs, or my pain mattered enough to interrupt Iris. I was finished waiting. "The order prohibits us from commercially launching, licensing, or distributing Northstar," I said. "It does not revoke my medical license, and it does not prohibit a physician from providing emergency clinical assistance." "You cannot make that interpretation alone," Grant said. "I'm not going to." I asked the summit's ethics officer, independent technical director, and emergency counsel to join the call. Northstar's platform was moved into an isolated, non-commercial testing environment with no billing function, customer access, or permanent installation. Every screen action would be recorded. Every command would carry a timestamp. The clinic's acting administrator authorized emergency consultation, and the patient's husband provided consent because his wife was no longer able to do so herself. 2 independent technicians began preserving the input data, system calculations, communications, and transmission history. I turned to Grant. "You may be able to delay a product. You do not get to order a doctor to watch a patient die." Then I put on a headset. "Dr. Chen, tell me what happened." The patient, Elena Ruiz, had delivered a healthy baby 43 minutes earlier. The placenta had appeared intact, but her uterus remained enlarged and poorly contracted. She had lost approximately 1,800 milliliters of blood, possibly more. The clinic had administered oxytocin and begun fluids, but the bleeding continued. "Any lacerations?" I asked. "Nothing that explains this volume." "Ultrasound. Portable unit only. We cannot access Harborline's imaging guide." "You don't need their guide. Show me the scan directly." The image came through the weak satellite link in broken frames. I asked Dr. Chen to reposition the probe and describe what she saw rather than wait for a clearer picture. Tessa opened Northstar's transport panel beside me. "Helicopter is at Astoria," she said. 11 minutes until the launch cutoff. The island's eastern pad has crosswinds beyond its safe limit. Check the secondary landing sites. The old fisheries lot is protected by the ridge, but the county marked the access road closed last year. "Why?" "Washout near the northern entrance." "Can they reach it from the clinic through Harbor Road?" She pulled up the last locally cached road map and called the island's volunteer fire chief through the satellite relay. While she coordinated transport, I guided Dr. Chen through the assessment. The uterus was boggy, supporting uterine atony, but the scan suggested retained tissue near the fundus. Elena's chart also documented severe asthma. Harborline's copied interface suddenly reappeared on one of the clinic's tablets. A green button instructed Dr. Chen to request cloud authorization before continuing to the next treatment step. "I can't get past the screen," she said. "You won't," I told her. "It was designed to wait for a server that cannot hear you." An engineer bypassed the screen manually. The next page recommended carboprost. Northstar issued an immediate contraindication warning. "Do not give that medication," I said. "She has severe asthma." Dr. Chen looked toward the Harborline tablet. It didn't flag that. Because the copied system displayed the treatment sequence without the safety logic that was supposed to verify the patient's conditions before recommending the next drug. Iris had copied the visible doorway and left out the foundation beneath it. "We have misoprostol," Dr. Chen said. "Use it according to your hemorrhage protocol. Continue uterine massage. Prepare the balloon tamponade kit and begin the retained tissue procedure if you can do so safely." The clinic had 2 units of uncross-matched blood, but one had been reserved for another emergency and both were approaching their temperature limit after the power failure. Tessa was already on the phone. "There's a regional emergency blood transport unit in Seaside," she said. "They can meet the helicopter at Astoria with 4 units, but the aircraft has to launch in 6 minutes. "Landing site?" "Fire chief says Harbor Road is open. They can clear the fisheries lot." On screen, Elena's pressure fell to 72/40. Her husband appeared briefly behind Dr. Chin, holding their newborn against his chest. His face had gone empty with terror. I kept my voice level. Dr. Chin, tell me what you have in place. 2 large bore lines. First unit is running. Tranexamic acid given. Balloon kit open. Good. Do not wait for the software to tell you that you're ready. You're ready. The satellite image froze. For 9 seconds, we had no sound. Then Dr. Chen's voice returned. Balloon is in. Bleeding is slowing, but she's still unstable. Tessa raised one finger. The helicopter is launching. A cheer almost began in the observation area, but I stopped it with a look. Launching was not the same as arriving. Northstar recalculated the transfer plan from information stored locally, the last confirmed road conditions, clinic resources, blood inventory, aircraft capacity, and the safer landing area behind the ridge. Tessa relayed the route to the fire crew and arranged for the blood transport team to meet the flight before departure. Harborline's platform continued displaying an authorization failure. Northstar continued working without asking the storm for permission. The helicopter lifted 3 minutes before the flight window closed. Elena reached the fisheries lot with a nurse maintaining pressure on the balloon and the first unit of blood nearly complete. The aircraft landed in winds that had already become too dangerous at the eastern pad. 46 minutes later, the Regional Trauma Center confirmed that Elena had arrived alive. She remained in critical condition and required emergency surgery, but her blood pressure had recovered enough to sustain organ perfusion. Her baby arrived separately with his father. No one in the operations room spoke for several seconds after the confirmation. Then the people behind the glass began applauding. I removed my headset. Only then did I realize that the entire rescue had been carried on the summit's internal emergency broadcast. Hundreds of physicians, administrators, journalists, and technology specialists had watched Harborline's system fail and Northstar's system continue. Iris reached the media room before Elena entered surgery. The rescue was made possible by Harborline's existing clinical infrastructure, she told the cameras. Dr. Ellison used workflows developed during her employment with us. If anything, tonight demonstrates why those technologies legally belong to Harborline. Grant stood several feet behind her. He did not correct her. But this time, he did not step forward to support her either. A reporter asked whether Northstar had violated the restraining order. I did not answer. Saving Elena proved that Northstar worked. It did not prove who owned it. I went directly to the summit's technical committee. Preserve both systems exactly as they existed when the emergency call began, I said. I want the source code hashes, cloud failure logs, local operation records, vendor access history, activation timestamps, and every file transmitted during the rescue. The committee chair nodded. Harborline may object. They can object after the evidence is sealed. Tessa stood beside me. Include the creation history for Northstar's offline module and every revision of the Lantern Q workflow. Iris had wanted a public argument. We gave her an audit. 10 days later, Harborline's board, the State Medical Ethics Committee, and an independent digital forensics firm convened a public hearing. I sat at the witness table with Tessa on one side and our attorney on the other. Grant sat behind Harborline's counsel. Iris occupied a separate table with 2 lawyers of her own. The first evidence displayed was not computer code. It was one of my notebooks. The pages were 6 years old, stained with coffee and marked with revisions made during visits to rural clinics. They contained the original clinical framework for operating without reliable connectivity, along with dates, patient safety questions, and the names of physicians who had reviewed the early concepts. Next came emails between Tessa and me that predated Harborline's funded development program. They showed that we had discussed localized emergency routing long before the hospital claimed ownership of the idea. Northstar's complete version history followed. Every build carried an independent timestamp and unique code hash. Nurses and paramedics who had participated in our tests provided signed statements and recordings describing when each feature had been developed. Then the forensic investigators presented the access records. A shared software vendor had been hired to perform compatibility testing for Northstar. The same vendor also maintained portions of Harborline's cloud interface. Using credentials issued for limited testing, one of its employees had downloaded restricted Northstar files after receiving a request from Iris's project director for comparative workflow materials. Internal emails showed those files being forwarded to Iris's team. One message asked why Northstar's prototype contained a local verification engine that Harborline did not possess. Iris's response appeared on the screen. Replicate the user-facing sequence. Remove unsupported offline elements before executive review. Another email instructed the team to retain the phrase lantern queue until a permanent marketing name could be selected. The temporary phrase they should never have known became a digital fingerprint. The investigators compared the two systems. Harborline had copied visible screens, workflow order, and temporary terminology. Northstar's underlying offline database, medication safety verification, and transport logic had been created independently after my resignation. The core technology did not belong to Harborline. Its accusation against me had depended on a declaration stating that Northstar's features originated inside the hospital. Audit records proved that statement was false. The board minutes established the rest. Grant had withdrawn my appointment from consideration 3 weeks before the unveiling and conditioned the Mercer Foundation's additional donation on Iris becoming executive director. He had later approved legal action against Northstar without disclosing the full extent of his personal relationship with the Vale family or obtaining an independent review of Iris's system. His phone backup was admitted because it demonstrated that he had known, before authorizing the lawsuit, that Iris had accessed his device, rejected my calls, deleted notifications, and sent a message in his name during my medical emergency. He had known she was willing to interfere with my private life. He had still given her unchecked authority over my work. When it was my turn to speak, I did not describe Iris as Grant's first love. I did not ask the board to care about my anniversary, my divorce, or the hours I had spent bleeding alone. I spoke about governance. I spoke about what happens when gratitude becomes a private currency used to purchase public authority. I spoke about patients who cannot afford to have safety features removed because their clinics are not profitable enough to impress donors. Then I looked at Grant. Evan's heart saved Grant's life. It did not entitle Iris to my work, my marriage, or my future. Grant lowered his eyes. Gratitude is honorable only when you repay a debt with something that belongs to you. The independent audit issued its conclusions that afternoon. Northstar's core system was not a Harborline asset. Iris's team had obtained protected test materials through unauthorized vendor access. Harborline's court filing contained materially false ownership claims. Iris had known that offline capability was essential during network failure, yet removed it to reduce costs and conceal how incomplete the copied platform was. The audit also found that Grant had acted under a serious undisclosed conflict of interest in both Iris's appointment and the legal action against Northstar. The court dissolved the restraining order. Iris was removed as executive director that evening. Her conduct was referred for professional ethics review and investigation of commercial theft and false representations. Grant requested permission to address the board publicly. He admitted that he had bypassed the appointment process, allowed survivors' guilt to influence corporate governance, and repeatedly protected Iris from consequences. He acknowledged that the lawsuit against Northstar had been authorized without an adequate factual basis. Then he resigned as Harborline's chief executive and surrendered the Mercer Foundation's special veto power over board appointments. Afterward, Harborline offered me the executive position I had once expected to receive. I declined. I would not return to the same office simply because the people who had forced me out were finally embarrassed enough to unlock the door. As part of the settlement, the Maternal Emergency Center removed Iris's name. It was placed under the oversight of an independent council composed of patients, rural physicians, nurses, paramedics, and family caregivers. Northstar remained independent. Tessa and I directed part of the settlement into emergency equipment, training, and offline access for remote clinics. The rest allowed us to expand without accepting money from Grant or the Mercer Foundation. The power I gained was not the position my husband returned to me. It was the authority I had built where he could no longer take it away. My daughter was born 7 weeks later. I named her Hope, not because her arrival erased what had happened, but because Hope had survived without requiring me to deny any of it. Grant was not in the delivery room. Tessa stayed beside me, along with the medical team I trusted. Grant met Hope according to the parenting agreement our lawyers had completed before her birth. He arrived on time, washed his hands when the nurse asked him to, and held his daughter as if he understood that loving her did not give him ownership of the room. During the following year, he did not send extravagant gifts. He did not arrange interviews about redemption or use his resignation as proof that I owed him another chance. He attended scheduled visits. He respected my home and my work. When I said no, he did not ask again in a different form. He began therapy to confront the survivor's guilt he had transformed into lifelong obedience to the Vale family. He learned that honoring Evan did not require surrendering his judgment to Iris. More painfully, he learned that believing himself grateful and compassionate had not prevented him from being cruel. I saw the change. I did not confuse seeing it with forgiving everything that came before. After Hope's first birthday, Grant stayed behind while Tessa carried the last gifts to my car. "Would you have dinner with me?" he asked. "Just the two of us." I studied him. A year earlier, he would have assumed that sharing a child entitled him to an answer he wanted. Now he stood several feet away and waited. "One dinner is not forgiveness," I said. "And it is not a marriage." "I know." His voice remained quiet. "This time, I'm asking. I'm not deciding for you." I let the silence remain between us long enough to know it belonged to me. "One dinner," I said at last. "Nothing more." He nodded without trying to turn it into a promise. For the first time in our marriage, Grant waited for my answer without deciding what it had to mean.